Well, Danny, 3 years after COVID hit, I finally decided to catch it and give it to my entire family. So
Oh no.
that's why we couldn't record last week. I'm sorry.
I will forgive you. Was that your first run-in with
My very
COVID?
first, my very first, and it sucked. And
Wow.
I can only imagine how bad it would have been if I hadn't been vaccinated because it knocked me out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you, modern medicine, for protecting you. And now we're back. No excuses. Every week we're coming to you.
That's right. Hello and welcome to Not Another Business Podcast, where we break down business news and cultural events according to rules we've entirely made up. I'm KJ Miller, ex-corporate consultant and current CEO and co-founder of Minted Cosmetics.
And I'm Daniela Dektar McCarthy, ex-corporate lawyer and current general counsel at Ness. And fun fact, KJ and I have been friends since our Harvard a cappella days because we are that cool. Disclaimer to start the show, the views we express today are our own and not those of our companies. Today on the show, we're talking about peoplehood. What is peoplehood, you ask? What is it? Well, it turns out the founders of SoulCycle had some extra time and money on their hands, and they decided to launch a new business that is all about human connection. And they purport this has roots in their first business, SoulCycle. It's just the next iteration. They're calling it Peoplehood, and we're digging into what it's all about. Today on the show, we're talking about peoplehood. What is peoplehood, you ask? Well, it turns out the founders of SoulCycle had some extra time and money on their hands, and they decided to use it to launch a new business that's all about human connection. They're calling it Peoplehood, and we're digging into what it's all about.
Yeah, news of this broke. They actually, I think, started in beta last summer, and people started talking about it in earnest last fall. And I remember you and I sort of looked at it, and we were like, okay, interesting. But more people have had more to say about this business as of late. And so, yeah, it feels like the right time for us to take a look under the hood a little bit and see what we think about peoplehood.
Yeah, I think my feelings about this I'm going to end up feeling similarly like I did to SoulCycle, which is like, I just don't know. But let's spend some time digging into why that is, shall we?
Let's do it right after our shameless plug. All right, folks, today I am plugging Minted Cosmetics. Minted, as you know, is short for pigmented. We create everyday beauty for every hue. And because it is Women's History Month, we are celebrating all of you pretty much every weekend by spotlighting another one of our amazing products for women. For instance, this weekend we're spotlighting our Skin by Minted foundation. We've never done this, folks. We're calling it March Madness because foundation is 40% off for just this weekend to give you a chance to try it and to fall in love with it like so many people have. So head over to mintedcosmetics.com and let's get back to the show.
All right, KJ, hit us with the facts. What on earth is peoplehood, and why should we care about it?
So, Peoplehood, as we mentioned, is a startup launched last summer by SoulCycle founders Elizabeth Cutler and Julie Rice, who, as a reminder, both made a cool $90 million when they sold SoulCycle to Equinox. So, they're very rich. And while they could just sit back and enjoy their wealth, they've decided to start a new company called Peoplehood. So as of right now, in its current incarnation, who knows, maybe it'll expand into different things. But right now, what they do is they host 60-minute sessions that they call gathers. And this is where groups of people, strangers, get together and discuss their deepest hopes, fears, stories, what's going on in their lives. So this is something that the founders say on their website. If you go to their Our Story page. When we left SoulCycle in 2016, the world felt different. We were all quote unquote connected, but felt oddly disconnected. Social, cultural, and technological forces were pulling us all apart, and the institutions keeping us together were losing relevance. People reported feeling isolated, lonely, and burned out. And then the pandemic hit. We spent 3 years researching how communities form, how to bring people together, and how feeling connected can affect our happiness and health. We became obsessed with creating a modern place to gather with an intentional focus on relationship building skills. We set out to create a group practice driven by peer-to-peer connection, collaboration, and growth. The result is Peoplehood. So, before we get into speculation, a few more facts. So that's what it purports to be, right? That is very esoteric and motivational and inspirational, which I think every startup is, right? But here's sort of how it works. So again, if you go to their website, they lay out like what are these gathers, what happens in these gathers. So they say, step 1, humans have a problem. So happiness and health is more than anything connected to the quality of our relationships, and yet 61% of adults identify as lonely, while 4 in 10 report having no close personal relationships. So then they say, step 2, listening is the magic pill. Active listening, which is listening without interrupting, offering advice, or giving an opinion, is the number 1 relationship building skill. Feeling heard boosts oxytocin and dopamine, our feel-good brain chemicals. So that brings us to number 3, which is Peoplehood builds high-quality human connections. Our mission is to equip people with space, support, and skills to build deeper, more meaningful relationships with others and themselves. So essentially what they're saying here, and I've actually read this data both in business school and beyond about how lonely a lot of adults are. It's actually quite surprising the percentage of adults who report, like they said, having no close personal relationships, like not even family. Okay, not family, not friends. Literally, they just feel like they've got at best acquaintances. That's 4 in 10, 40% of adults, and 60% reporting feeling lonely is huge. And there are a lot of studies that say your relationships are directly related to your health, right? And the quality of those relationships. So they're saying, look, this is a big problem. It's a big, well-acknowledged problem. What can we do about it? We think what we can do about it is get people into these groups and have them actively listen to one another, because active listening is the key to relationship building, and relationships are key to health and happiness. So that's sort of, the gist of what they're saying. And then, as I mentioned, last fall is when more reports about this company started popping up. But also recently there was a Today Show spot about it. And I watched that Today Show spot, and this reporter went, and she filmed herself and the gather, so you could sort of see what it looked like. And she actually was getting really emotional just talking about, with these strangers, the things going on in her life, the things going on with her friends. I think one of the things she was saying was all of her friends are getting married and having kids, and she's not. And, she just sort of needed a place to express how she was feeling about that, and to just be able to say it, not because she's like bitter or angry, but because like she is feeling things about it and just sort of like needed that outlet. So anyway, that's the goal. The goal is give people the opportunity to be heard, to actively listen, to practice those relationship building skills. There are some things that I think are worth mentioning here, though, because it all sounds very lofty and very great. And those things are, 1, the price, and then 2, who's guiding these conversations.
Yes. Tell us about that. So how much is Peoplehood?
Yes. So Peoplehood is $95 a month if you're doing it virtually. And if you're doing it in person at their flagship New York location, it is $165 a month. So a lot. This is a lot of money, in my opinion. $100 a month or more to chit chat is not a price that I would call widely accessible. It's not $1,000 a month, but it's a good chunk of change. So I do think that calls a little bit into question how you're going to sort of reframe the problem of adult loneliness when your pricing very much caps it to a certain market. And then the guides, this is another thing that has gotten a lot of attention. So they're very clear on their website and in interviews. This is not therapy. And the people guiding these conversations are not therapists. What's interesting, though, to me is that they don't seem to be any sort of anything. What they say on their site is, our guides are a diverse group of humans, handpicked and trained to deliver an exceptional experience. Guides are storytellers, super connectors, DJs, and empaths with big hearts and even bigger smiles. So I don't know what I don't know what that means.
When I am feeling like I need someone to listen, the first thing I think is, I need to find me a good DJ. So I get it. They have good ears. They know when to transition. They know how to make a good mashup, and they know how to listen to my problems.
Yeah. So there you have it. Those are their guides. And then the final thing I will say before we get into speculation, because I think it's very much time for us to speculate, is their privacy policy. So they say on their site that, they make a promise of confidentiality. When you come into Peoplehood, you make a promise of confidentiality to each other. So there's an understanding that, you're not going to listen to what people are saying and then go run and tell people about it. And, people have compared this to like Alcoholics Anonymous. No, there's no binding legal contract, but it is sort of an understanding that you make when you come into this space and into these rooms. However, TikToker Meredith Lynch, who we've talked about before on this show, has made a couple of videos saying that she thinks that this confidentiality promise is a bit dubious, because if you actually go to their site and read their terms and conditions, they make it very clear that they, are collecting your data on their site, and that they might sell or give this data to third parties, and that they have no, control over what the third parties then do with your data. So are we being confidential? Maybe, maybe not. I do think it's worth saying, it seems very clear when they talk about data, they're talking about like your online data, your name, your age, the things that you're inputting into their surveys, not the things that you're like going into these groups and saying. Like if you're going to these groups and talking about your divorce, I don't think they're saying they're going to sell that data, right? But it is interesting when you lead with confidentiality as a promise we make. Also, we might collect and sell your data. Those two things do seem like they're a little bit potentially in conflict. So those are the facts as I understand them. Anything you'd like to add there?
No, I think that covers it. I guess location-wise, they have a New York City location. They have not yet expanded to other cities, right? So Correct. You're either in New York City or you might be doing a virtual gather, which you did mention. But I think that is important because, we'll get into it in speculation. First thing I just need to share outright is my husband's reaction, because it was so pronounced. I started telling him about Peoplehood, and he said, please don't tell me they use the word empaths. And they do use the word empaths. And then he said, I'm out. I'm out. I don't want to know. He said, this is just unlicensed group therapy. Like, yes, they are very clear that it's not therapy, but that doesn't mean that it's okay, right? This is unlicensed group therapy. Mm-hmm. And so it's just very clearly a grift. Like, it is just something that is, it's not innovation. It's just something that exists to take people's money away from them. It's modern snake oil. Wow. Really strong feelings.
Yeah.
Really strong feelings.
Strong words from a strong man. Here's the thing. So I've never done group therapy. Have you ever done group therapy? Is that too personal?
I have not. Oh, it's not too personal. Yeah. I have not.
I've only done solo therapy. But I definitely understand where Tom is coming from with that, because I do think even if you are very clear about the fact that this isn't therapy and these aren't therapists, if you're bringing people together to talk about themselves, their issues, their triumphs, their trials, it's gonna look and feel a lot like therapy. And on the one hand, I think that means you might get a lot of the benefits of therapy out of those conversations. But on the other hand, it means like none of the risk that is, I guess, absorbed by talking to a licensed clinical therapist is absorbed here, right? So if you're saying things that to a therapist might raise some red flags, might help her or him understand, you might actually need to speak to a psychiatrist about this. This level of anxiety might be something that we need to think about medication for.
Right.
This particular relationship sounds unhealthy, borderline abusive. The things that they are trained to pick up on and then act on, you don't have that in this space, right? Certainly not with homeboy DJ. So, so I do think that there's a real risk, even if you say out loud and upfront, this is not therapy, that doesn't mean that things aren't going to be revealed that would typically be revealed in therapy. And it sort of sounds like you're not going to have, these guides are not going to have the tools to deal with things that might come up the way a therapist would deal with them. So I can definitely understand that fear and that perspective. Do you share that?
I'm very conflicted. I think one of the merits I see in this business is it is addressing a real problem, right? Like there is tons of data that says loneliness is an issue. And actually I was looking at a study that Cigna, like the insurance company, kind of funded. And the basis for some of the data they looked at was the U.S. Surgeon General's claim in 2018 that loneliness is an epidemic. It's on the rise, and that was before COVID. That was before quarantine. That was before lockdowns. That was before remote work. All of these things, which seem like they will probably exacerbate loneliness. So there is a real problem, and I don't think they're the only business or type of organization that has cropped up recently to address it, right? Like Meetup. That's an organization where you just go and find people who are interested in something similar and you hopefully make friends, right? But the conceit there is find people, right? Yeah. City Girls Who Walk. Have you heard about this? Okay, so I don't know how I stumbled on this, but there was also a recent Today Show feature. There's this fitness influencer. She has something like 1.9 million followers on TikTok. So not a crazy influencer, but she has a decent set of following, who said she was feeling lonely in New York. And she just posted who wants to go for a walk with me? And it turned into hundreds, thousands of people joining her on Sundays in Central Park to go walk. And actually
that's too many folks. The Central Park,
I know. And now actually it's in multiple cities. There's City Girls Who Walk DC, City Girls Who Walk Berlin. It's kind of crazy. But the premise there is also people were feeling lonely. They just want to meet new people and talk. So I think the point is, I do see Peoplehood as addressing a real problem. And where a problem exists, that is a good foundation for a business that could catch on.
Yeah, I certainly agree that the problem they're looking to solve is real. And I will say, I felt a little conflicted about doing this episode, having not tried this business, because we are doing all this speculating without having tried it. I just couldn't really bring myself to pay for it yet. If I'm going to pay for it, I want it to be because I want to try it, right?
We should have pretended we were a couple. There's a discount for couples going.
True. But yeah, I guess I feel a little bit conflicted too. The thing that I like about it is, I will say I can relate to having that feeling sometimes where you're talking to someone who you don't know that well, and feeling like it's almost easier to talk to that person because there's no strings attached.
Right.
And there's no expectation necessarily of follow-up, but also I don't feel as burdened talking about things that maybe are upsetting me. Because sometimes I feel like there's a burden of oh, am I just weighing down on my friend? But if it's someone I don't know that well, I don't feel that burden. I feel yeah, I can talk about this because you also could talk about your thing. And then, we're just going to both go on about our business. And that release of just sort of speaking your piece is something that I think is helpful and can feel really nice, and that you don't always have an outlet to do. So on the one hand, I do think that that's great, or could be really great. And then on the other hand, I do think I agree with Tom that it just feels really risky to set up something that looks and feels like therapy that isn't therapy.
Right.
And to me, that's what we've got going on here. Even some of the prompts, because they've said in interviews, like some of the prompts that the guides will give, and the prompt will be like, how I'm really feeling today, and that's pretty therapeutic prompt to me, So I don't know. I do get a little bit nervous, but I guess, if I think about, do I think it'll catch on? Mm-hmm. That to me I'm really curious to see how this works outside of New York City. Mm. I think New Yorkers are uniquely willing to try new things. Mm-hmm. And uniquely willing to jump on a new trend, particularly one started by SoulCycle founders. Mm-hmm. New Yorkers are also fairly obsessed with SoulCycle. So I think it's a pretty distinct crop of people they're starting with. I just don't know that I can imagine if you plop this thing down in Columbus, Ohio, which is where I'm from, that you'd get that much of an uptake, because the Columbus, Ohioans that I know, first of all, most of them have been there for a very long time. They were born there, they were raised there, and they stay there. So they are very well connected. They're not transplants. They have family there. They have high school friends there. They have college friends there. They have church friends there. They have their kids, play date, mom, dad, just the people I know in Columbus, Ohio. I don't know a lot of lonely folks in Columbus, Ohio.
But does that mean you think it would potentially take off in Chicago, LA, SF, maybe cities where there are more transplants and it's not necessarily their folks' home base?
Yes, I do think it'd be more likely in cities like that. But the funny thing about that is, I almost feel like that was kind of the Wings model too. And it sort of feels like, and I can name a couple other businesses in the last 5-10 years where it was so focused on big cities, the New Yorks and SFs of the world. But in order to actually scale and be profitable, it needed to penetrate just regular old cities, not the biggest cities, the regular cities too, and really struggled to do that. And so maybe this business can be perfectly fine and perfectly big only in the New Yorks and San Franciscos of the world. But I'm a little skeptical just based on what I've seen from other businesses who have tried that. And I don't know that I see it catching on beyond the New Yorks and San Franciscos of the world.
I think some of this really depends on what the purpose of Peoplehood is. And I'm not clear, based on the materials they've put out. Is the point to go and, as you say, burden-free offload all of your thoughts and have people actively listen? Is the purpose to build the tools needed to develop meaningful relationships outside of the Peoplehood room, right? You learn how to actively listen. You can then go out in the world and take that skill with you to make friends outside of the room, right? Which would be one thing. Is the purpose to make friends with the people who are in the room, right? At some point, this is a membership, right? This is a membership. There's going to be membership events, I think is what they say. At some point, you're going to start seeing people who you do know because you've met them before in this room a bunch. Right? And are you supposed to make friends with them? If you are, does that all of a sudden change the initial premise of go in and offload all of your thoughts to people who you don't know and you
Right.
don't see. Like, it
Right.
seems like there is a bit of a tension between this idea of go in and share all of your thoughts with people who are strangers, that can be so meaningful, and this membership model of like returning and coming back. Right? Unless there's some kind of like programming to say like, oh, actually, like you've already been in a session very recently with like 5 other people in this room, so we're going to put you in a different room, you know?
Right,
But
right,
I don't,
right.
I haven't seen any of that. So I do think it's like how much it catches on kind of depends on what they're really going for. I think if they're going for, actually, and I don't know which one would be more likely actually in other cities. Like, I guess your point is if people are already well connected in other cities, then like the idea of come here and like potentially come out with friends is less compelling. And so, but the former of like come here and talk to people who like don't have a stake in whatever it is you're going to say could still be relevant.
Right.
Although overall, I don't know how well that works with their business model.
Yeah, I think the tension you're describing is really astute, because I don't know if what you're saying is we're trying to solve the problem of loneliness.
Right.
Then to me that would imply that you're not only trying to get people to be better at actively listening, but that you're also trying to give people better and deeper connections.
Right.
With the people in the room.
Right.
You
right.
know what I mean? And if that's what you're trying to do, then I think there's a tension with this idea of like me coming and offloading and, you know, speaking my mind and whatever, because eventually what's the difference between that group of people and any other group of people that I know, if I do know that group of people? And then also, if that's the point for me to build these deeper connections and avoid loneliness, then I do think you're going to have trouble transplanting this idea to the non-big cities of the world where people do have, you know, deep sort of lifelong connections. So I think there's a real tension there, because it's not clear to me what problem exactly are they trying to solve. Are they trying to solve the problem that none of us are good listeners and we should all be better? We should all be better listeners. And if we were better listeners, like just generally we'd be better at human connection, period. Or are they trying to solve the problem of loneliness?
Right.
Because it kind of seems like they're trying to solve both.
And actually, this brings me to my initial comment, which I feel like I'm going to feel the same way about this business as I do with SoulCycle. Because with SoulCycle, the problem for me was, are you trying to give me a good workout in 60 minutes where I'm sweating and listening to good music? Or are you trying to force me to be friends with everyone around me? Because I precisely did not like the latter piece. I did not like, I mean, a lot of people were obsessed with it. So, you know, maybe for some people this is, they buy it, they believe it, and it feeds them. But for me, I couldn't stand the like, we are all one. We ride with the same beat. We ride to the top of the same mountain. Like, namaste. You know, like I always had trouble taking the leap of like, we are a cycling class that is actually a community of people who are there for each other. Like, no, I'm not there for each other. I'm not there for you. Right. The room is dark. I don't want to see you. I might want to feel the energy. Like, there is something to like an energy in a class. I might want to feel the energy and feel motivated by having other people who are working out around me. But like, I don't necessarily think that the cycling room is the foundation of the great friendship, or should be. Right. And so, yeah, I feel like a similar tension. Pivoting a bit, but back to something we talked about, because one of the things we said in the facts is that it's kind of seems expensive, right? To have to pay for just a room of people that I can go offload to. And even though this is not group therapy is probably one of the closest things. How does it price-wise compare to group therapy?
Yeah, so I don't know. I think if you actually use it to its fullest extent, it's cheaper, because the $95 a month for virtual is for unlimited gathers. Same with $165. Right. So if they're hosting, call it, I don't know, every night of the week, and you actually go every night of the week, right? You know, for $95, 30 days, now we're talking about $3 a session. I'm guessing group therapy is more expensive than that. Right. So I do think you could make the case that It's actually very cost effective depending on how often you decide to go. What makes it feel not price optimal to me is the fact that, one, nobody's going to go every day, right? So maybe at most we're talking about people going every week. But two, the fact that it's this subscription model, I just think like you're asking up front for people to commit upwards of $100 a month. There's just only but so many people who can do that. Like we're actually talking about, you and I are pretty privileged. So for us, maybe that amount doesn't sound that much, but for the average American, including, by the way, the average American in New York, people forget that like a lot of people in New York don't make a lot of money. For the average American, that is actually a lot to part with and to commit to parting with every single month. Yeah. And so I was a little surprised to see, and maybe this will be in a different iteration, I was a little surprised to see they didn't offer any a la carte options. Because to me, if the point is every time you go to one of these gathers, you're better off, then maybe I only need to go to 3 or 4 a year, right? Like maybe every quarter I need to just do a little bit of a refresher, go in and have one of things. Maybe once a month I need to go in. But to not offer that option, I think then, and say like you are committed to spending this amount every month, I just think shrinks the pool of people who can really access this.
Yeah, I think that's right. But I guess on the other hand, I'm just going to be an advocate of peoplehood. Like, and this isn't therapy, but therapy is done best with practice, right? Like you get the most out of it with repeated returns, right? Or repeated sessions. And so even though this isn't therapy, like maybe people do get the most out of consistently going, and it is more affordable than therapy. So maybe that's worth the risks that you're taking on for doing therapy-like work with non-therapists and with DJs.
I really think they need to take the DJs piece out of that.
They really need to take the DJ thing down.
It makes it very hard to take seriously. Like,
well, it also makes me feel like the people who are going because they are attracted to that description, I don't want to talk to them. Even if they're strangers, right? Like if you're so moved by the idea that you get to go talk to a quote super connector, what is that word? Or empath or DJ, like you might be a stranger, but I don't want to tell you my problems because I think you might be a tool.
Yeah, exactly.
But maybe I'm judgmental and maybe I'm the problem making everyone feel lonely. I don't know.
Well, I mean, look, we've talked about it left, right, and center. We've looked at the issue. What's your final verdict here on Peoplehood?
My final verdict is that it will probably see success in New York because it is addressing a problem that does exist, because New Yorkers do love this shit, as you said. And because I think they have a track record of doing things like this. Mm-hmm. But it is not for me.
Yeah. My final verdict is I'm going to keep paying close attention because I can envision a world where I'd be willing to try it. But for now, I agree. It's not for me.
So it's time for Judge and Jury. If you're new here, this is a segment where we dive into recent news and ask whether there was a display of good or bad judgment. This week, we're talking about Michael B. Jordan. KJ, what's happening here?
Well, Michael B. Jordan, I honestly love this. He's in a little bit of hot water because, he's promoting his new movie, Creed 3, where he's not only stars, but he also directed. He was doing one of many, red carpet events that he's been doing during promotion. And, there are people on the sidelines who interview you. So there was a woman on the sideline doing interviews, and he walked up to her. She starts off by going, "You and me, we go way back." Because apparently they went to middle school together, right? Mm-hmm. So she goes, "Me and you, we go way back." And he goes, "Yeah, I was the corny one, right?" And gives her this look like Like, oh yeah, I remember you. You remember me? You remember calling me corny? Like the look in his eye, honestly, was so. I don't even know how to describe it. It just was very much like, oh, see, you tried it. And I, 25 years later, am here to remind you that you tried me. And so he says that. He says, oh, right, I was the corny one, right? And she goes, what? No, I don't think I ever said that. He goes, oh, yeah, you did. He says, oh yeah, I remember you did. You did say it. I remember I was corny, right? And so then she kind of plays up. She's like, well, ha ha ha. And then she goes into her questions and he answers the questions. It's not like he says like, yeah, I was the corny one, right? And then blows her off. He says that. And then he answers her questions. He plays along, whatever. They have a perfectly nice, 30-second, 60-second exchange where because then his co-star comes up, I think Jonathan Majors. And she's like, which one of you is, the sexiest or whatever? Which one of you? And they're sort of laughing and saying like, oh, it's him. No, it's him. So after that, honestly, it was like perfectly normal sort of exchange. And then it ends 30 seconds later and she ends by saying like, well, you're not corny now, clearly still trying to save face. Anyway, the internet has had a lot of reactions about this. You sort of have two camps. One camp is like, yes, expose your bullies. Like it's about, that's what we're about out here. Like if you get bullied, you get to come back no matter what time and call them out and say like, look at me now. Right. So there's one camp of people that's very pro Michael B. Jordan in this exchange. Then there's another camp of people who feel like, sir, you are a big bad movie star. Okay. You are a multimillionaire. You are super rich. You've clearly won. Okay. And you versus the bully, you have clearly won. So now to like bring it up all these years later and sort of like be in her face, like, yeah, right. You call me corny, right? Like that is you degrading yourself and punching down. And there's just like never any good reason to do that. So my question to you is, what do you think? Was this a display of good or bad judgment? Because the internet, is having a big debate about it.
I'm in camp one. He didn't bring it up. She did. She brought up the connection. And by the way, like we all know middle school is awful and traumatic, and those are formative years. So if she's going to bring it up, I think, has every right to say, yeah, we do go way back. You were awful. Which he actually didn't. He just said, you call me corny, and then he goes on with the interview and he gives a perfectly normal interview. So I didn't find his behavior to be, below him or punching down. I think she tried to use a lever that she shouldn't have tried because clearly he was impacted by her. And so that just didn't work. Like bad judgment to this interviewer for thinking she could gloss over probably what felt like real cruelty at a time of Michael B. Jordan's life, Yeah. That's what I think. What about you?
Yeah, I think I agree. I am not going to call this bad judgment. It would be bad judgment if Michael B. Jordan one day out of nowhere, went on a podcast and was like, yo, I'm calling out all my middle school bullies and just started reading out their names unprovoked and saying like, fuck you, I got all this money now, whatever. That would be very
I'm
bad
doxing them all. Here's their info.
Right. That would be very bad judgment. But in this case, I might actually go so far as to call it good judgment.
Yeah.
Because I think what he displayed was, it is not cool for you to act like something never happened if it did.
Right.
Don't come up to me acting as if we were one way, we were one thing when we weren't. And that's what you did. You don't get to like roll up talking about, yeah, we go way back, we're good friends, if y'all weren't good friends. And if the way you treated him was subpar. If that's something and you bring it up anyway, you should be prepared to deal with sort of the, this is sort of the ultimate fuck around and find out. So I almost think it's good judgment because I feel like Michael B. Jordan put a lot of folks on notice. Like we're not glossing over the truth anymore. Maybe that's the thing we did in the past. We're not doing it anymore. So if you have something from your past that you're not so happy about, or that you don't really want put out there, then you can't just gloss over it.
Right.
So, yeah.
And it's almost a model that people can use, right? Because it's basically like you can stand up and actually set the record straight, and then without making it so uncomfortable that we can't continue on with whatever the business at hand is. But we're going to acknowledge what the reality of the situation is.
Yeah, 100%. It kind of reminds me of, I actually did feel a little bit bad about this, but the first time they taught our minted cosmetics case at Harvard Business School, I went, because you go and you sort of like do the guest thing when they write a case about you. And one of the investment funds that we had pitched, they were like, one of the founders of that fund was in the class. He was a student in the class. And so, he raised his hand and said something about his fund. It's called Harlem Capital Partners. Now I'm just shouting them out, whatever. Harlem Capital Partners. He raised his hand and said something to the effect of like, this is why Harlem Capital Partners, our thesis is around supporting diverse founders, something. But he's saying it in the context of my case. And I'm standing there and I pitched Harlem Capital Partners and they said no, which by the way is fine. Many, many, many people said no. Right. But what you're not going to do is then sit up here and use my case as an example for why your fund has a reason for being. Nah, that's what we're not going to do. Right. And I said, I was like, yeah, that's so interesting because I pitched to y'all and you said no. And the whole class was like, wow, And I did feel a little bit bad because, like, he may not even... No, actually, I think he was one of the people who was a part of the pitch call. But it may not have been, like, his ultimate decision. Maybe it was somebody else at the fund.
Right.
But, yeah, it's like, no, this is what we're not going to do. We're not going to play pretend. And so, yeah, I think it was good judgment.
Good job, Michael B. Jordan. We're with you.
All right, guys, that's it for this week. As always, we hope you are loving the show. And we will be back next week. Don't you worry. So if you are loving the show, feel free to subscribe and leave us a 5-star review.
And be sure to follow us on social. I'm Danny DMC on TikTok, and KJ is I am KJ Miller.